Loss of a loved one. The loss of a loved one can be a very painful experience. The laughter and warmth shared with a loved one begins to get replaced by heartaches, heaviness, and uncontrollable tears. This can lead to grief that lasts as long as many years. Betrayal. Betrayals come with a feeling of a deep thrust into the heart. It is a feeling of shock and disappointment that comes from a trusted person divulging shared secrets, getting involved in one's setback, or shattering loyalty. Betrayal always leaves scars that may never heal. Heartbreak. Heartbreak is mostly experienced in romantic relationships. Imagine a love relationship that once blossomed and worked, but due to one reason or another has now become bitter. Bursts of laughter become streams of tears, and the heart feels like it's been torn apart. Terminal disease. Terminal disease comes with a feeling of slow death. Due to a terrible health condition, one becomes uncertain of when actual death is due. And every second is lived with the pain that comes from the disease itself and the battle against time. Divorce or separation. Divorce is a negative upgrade to heartbreak. It eats deeper into the heart than a breakup outside of marriage. It usually follows the breakdown of love, trust, and the spark that used to keep a couple together, and is replaced with feelings of hurt, bitterness, and resentment. Financial hardship. Financial hardship is a painful weight that breeds hopelessness and loss of dreams. Imagine having a picture of what you want but cannot have it because of financial constraints. It limits choices and causes worries much enough to take out peace of mind. Rejection. Rejection is a painful experience that kills hope and optimism. Imagine gathering the courage to send out business proposals or go from one interview session to another only to get negative responses each time. That can kill your vibes, right? Trauma. Trauma is a leftover or a stamp that comes from not so good experiences. The imprint trauma leaves makes the mind become a battlefield that is constantly raging with wars of terrible flashbacks, nightmares, and the fear of a repeat of the event that caused it. Failure. Failure is a pain hard enough to dash hopes and shatter self-worth. Putting in effort and giving it all to achieve a goal only to fall short is bad enough to quit trying. Disappointment, self-criticism, and pessimism set in, most especially if it becomes repetitive. Natural disaster. Natural disasters are one of the worst experiences anyone can have. Picture several sad events like hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, and wildfires, and the chaos they bring to the lives of the victims. It's disheartening. Natural disasters cause unexpected interruptions in people's lives, and also the inability to continue normal lives. Addiction. Addiction is a deadly trap that can waste an individual's entire life. It is like being in a hole against one's wish, and the more one tries to get out, the deeper one falls into it. But as bad as addiction is, it is not as painful as the failed attempts to detach from it. Loneliness. Loneliness is a feeling that results from disconnection from the world and the people around. Imagine being in a room filled with people and yet feeling alone. That's loneliness. Sometimes when people around you do not seem to understand you, you feel lonely because you'll be alone with your thoughts. Discrimination. Discrimination is a social vice that slowly takes life out of the victim. It involves being inaccurately judged, not by one's character, but by gender, age, race, tribe, or beliefs. Discrimination is tantamount to injustice and unfair treatment, traits traceable to stereotypes and prejudice. Infertility. Infertility is a painful plague to deal with. Most especially, it happens to an individual who loves children. Imagine having a dream of your house filled with kids all around you. And then, after many trials to achieve that, all efforts proved abortive. Although there are other options to get children, some people would rather give birth to them biologically. Bullying. Bullying is a tormenting experience capable of inflicting both physical and emotional pain. Bullying mostly happens to a person who has been made a target or victim by others who perceive themselves as superior and use that to control or dominate the victim. Existential crisis. An existential crisis is the terrible experience of feeling lost in a vast world. It happens to individuals who are struggling to find a genuine reason for their existence in the world. More like a question of purpose. Why am I here? Parental estrangement. Parental estrangement is a painful fracture that separates parents from their children. For whatever reasons responsible for it, this estrangement can cause communication breakdown, deep hurt, and growing distance between parent and children. Things get as bad as parents evicting their children from their homes, not caring what eats them up on the streets. Job loss. Job loss is a painful experience that can lead to a relapse into financial struggles. Imagine an individual who could get his financial needs met now stripped of the means to earn money. Life becomes hard, uncertainty sets in, confidence fizzles out, and the struggle begins. Social exclusion. Social exclusion is as bad as loneliness. You know what they say, a tree does not make a forest. Yeah, as humans, we need an association to survive. But when your immediate environment isolates you and treats you as odd, you feel no sense of belonging and are left out. That hurts badly. Parental grief. Parental grief is a heart-wrenching experience that leaves an indelible mark on the victim. The truth is, no one deserves to die, but it is just naturally expected for children to outlive their parents. It is more hurtful to see a parent who witnessed the birth of their child also experience its death. Caregiver stress. Caregiver stress is a huge burden on the individual who provides care for a loved one. As much as it exhibits a show of love and affection, it also interrupts the normalcy of the caregiver's life. Most of the time, the caregiver will only be able to chase his or her dreams again when the patient is hale and hearty. Emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is torture to the soul and can inflict deep psychological wounds. This can happen to a person who faces constant insults, criticisms, or belittlement from family, friends, or even their partners. Emotional abuse can drastically affect individuals' self-esteem and make them feel trapped. Toxic relationship. Toxic relationships are not so difficult to spot. Relationships, of whatever form or kind, are supposed to be mutually beneficial. But when they become emotionally and psychologically draining or filled with constant negative energy, they become toxic and unhealthy to continue with. Communication and trust are often lost in a toxic relationship. Miscarriage. Miscarriage is heartbreaking and devastating. It dashes the hopes of parenthood and weakens the will of the victim to try again because of the fear of repetition. The medical complications that may follow a miscarriage are another thing to deal with, coupled with grief and sadness from losing a baby that is being nurtured and expected. Homelessness. Homelessness is a global issue faced by many individuals. The hurt and pain that come from not being able to meet one of the most basic needs of life is deep. Finding shelter is pivotal to doing other important things in one's life, and when that is unachievable, it puts a pause on meeting some other essential needs. Sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is a deeply violating and traumatic experience as the consent of the victim is bypassed and disrespected. Usually, the activity of sex that should be pleasurable becomes the other way around, and that can leave a wound that may take years of struggle and multiple sessions of therapy to heal. Loss of body parts. The loss of one or more body parts can alter the overall life experience of a victim. Issues like amputation or removal of a body part due to medical reasons or accidents are agonizing and heavy for the heart to bear. It affects mobility and relationships, and it causes a struggle to accept the new reality. Domestic violence. Domestic violence is another painful experience that comes from mostly the closest people to an individual. It can manifest as physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. Picture man to woman, woman to man, or even parent to child constant abuse. They are all experiences that have long-lasting consequences. Displacement and refugee experiences. Displacement and refugee experiences are devastating events, sponsored mostly by war. Imagine the myriads of people who lost their homes to the world wars. The affected victims of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombs, and many more wars. Individuals who had a home the previous day suddenly became fugitives, struggling for where to lay their heads. It's so pathetic. Involuntary childlessness. Involuntary childlessness happens when individuals desire to have their own children and make efforts towards that, but to no avail. This can be very disappointing and emotionally draining. This experience evokes emotions like grief, isolation, sadness, and lack of fulfillment. It can even lead to the breakdown of an existing marriage. Mental health crisis. A mental health crisis is a period of mental distress that requires apt attention and close support. It can result from a traumatic experience or chronic or piled up stress. During this period, a victim experiences depression, panic attacks, severe anxiety, and even thoughts of suicide. None of this is sweet to go through. Natural childbirth complications. Natural childbirth complication is an experience that brings a mix of pleasure and pain. The good news of welcoming a new child to the world is followed by the shocking discovery that the gift is actually not a perfect one, plus the struggles that follow coping with those complications.